It is Friday. It is time for our weekly tradition of talking some Husker football recruiting with Bryan Munson of On3 and Husker Online. Rico is, by the way, running out to the press conference, so he will not be here for the rest of the show. He has, if you didn't hear, they're going to have a big volleyball matchup to kind of open up the season, the football season the next day. But the day before the Thursday game against Minnesota, they're going to have Nebraska and UNO play, as well as another exhibition matchup of in-state Nebraska schools, and hopefully break the sellout record for volleyball. Bryan, first we'll get into the recruiting for the football side first. But what do you think about the big announcement today and an outdoors volleyball game to go for the attendance record?
Cool stuff. I mean, I think obviously that the volleyball team's been kind of the class of athletics, it seems, so far down in Lincoln for the last couple of years, and they can do it. I mean, they sell out the Bob every single time. Might as well go ahead and sell out the outdoor too. So that's huge. And I remember, I remember how long ago it was. I think that there was another weekend, because is that right before the spring game, or is that the same weekend as? I couldn't quite catch what you were saying there as far as time.
I think it's planned for August, like before the first Nebraska game against Minnesota, actually in August.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so that's later on in the fall. Okay,
yeah.
Cool. I thought maybe you were talking about maybe doing something in the spring too. I was like, oh, that's amazing. But no, that's a wonderful way to draw some people in. That's for sure. Just hope you don't get those thunderstorms or any type of precipitation come rolling through to change your plans. But no, it sounds like an awesome idea.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. It's going to be, again, highlighting Nebraska. And by the way, if you're worried about, Nebraska does have, like you mentioned, they sell at the Bob all the time. They have the record for consecutive sellouts actually in volleyball as well, with 303 consecutive ones. This one will not count toward or against that one. It's kind of on its own. So the record will continue if Nebraska doesn't happen to sell out. 85,000 for this, which I don't know if they'll get that much, but certainly I think they only need about 17, 8, maybe 19,000 about to break the record. So we'll see if Nebraska can get that done. Let's talk some Nebraska football recruiting. With Bryan Munson. First, I wanted to catch up on your visit last weekend. Carter Nelson, you went out to 8-man football land in Ainsworth, Nebraska. How did that go, and what kind of was your first couple of thoughts? I know, didn't you watch a basketball game with him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was only about 5 minutes away from losing you guys forever in cellular this time. So I really felt like there was like I was headed west, and then I think I was turning north, and I think after I got on that road north, I was like, oh, this is going to run out pretty quickly. So I think it all was very fortunate that we had a chance to finish that up before things were just gone for a while. So that's number one. Number two, it was fantastic. The meeting was great. It was so productive. Such a great way to kind of get a feel for how things operate up there, how the support that he has basically from his family, from the town, from the school, from his teammates. He's not let this get to his head at all. He could have. He could let this thing overwhelm him and everybody else around him, but that is not what he is all about. And it's very hard to kind of keep telling people that, because it's like, I think that people just kind of feel like they're in it for, every recruit's in it for the same thing. I don't think that that's the case at all with Carter. And I don't know how else to kind of say that, but it's going to be really interesting to watch, because when we got there, the timing of that visit by us was pretty amazing. He had just picked up Alabama. He had just talked to Nick Saban. He had just come off a month in January, obviously, where he saw Nebraska and Notre Dame come through the doors. He's had another coach say, ask, do you guys have a runway nearby? Because there's going to be a ton of people that are going to come through here in the spring. So they've already foreshadowed just a stream of coaches coming up there and landing at the private airport in Ainsworth. When I turned the corner and I saw Carter Nelson for the first time shooting hoops, when he was literally playing his mom one-on-one, that's the way you want a D1 tight end to look like. He is put together. He is athletic, still coming off of still like a bad bum ankle sprain that he had gotten earlier in the season, but moving incredibly well. And when we talk to him, I think the part that's probably going to be the most frustrating to all the Nebraska fans is that we can't give you great insight, because he didn't let a lot of things. He didn't tip off a lot of things about where he's at in the process, and I think that he's very open. I do feel like Notre Dame is in a better standing than what probably some people are hoping. And I think that obviously his last answer to me that I included in my interview last week was that, he is a lifelong Nebraska fan, but it's not going to come down to that, at least at the moment. And I think there's going to be some difficulty though to travel out of Ainsworth. If he decided to go to anywhere else in the nation, there's not a lot of great places north that are competitive. There's tons of places east, west, south. But I think logistically, things get really difficult very quickly. Because, you're 2.5 hours away from Kearney, you're 3+ hours away from Grand Island, you're 3.5 away from Sioux Falls. Just getting in and out of places, it's going to be tough. So, ultimately, I thought it was a great visit, great kid. Just got to be patient here with this guy. I told you guys last year, Malachi is going to make people sweat. Carter Nelson's really going to make some people sweat, but it's not based on any type of attention factor. Not that Malachi was. It's just he's going to go about doing this process, and it's going to take him to some very interesting places.
Now, there's a bevy of guys, too, from Bellevue West, considered, Davon Hall, highly regarded as one of the top guys in the state. How's Nebraska kind of on that? I don't want to call it trio, but, they've got several guys out there Nebraska's probably looking at.
Yeah, no, I think that you're coming up on a really interesting time of the year. March and April kind of open up things again to where you can start hosting unofficial visitors. You'll start getting the official visitors in, a month or two behind that. And it's like, I know Davon Hall is very interested in getting back to Nebraska. However, there's nothing scheduled. And I'll tell you that the last time I spoke to Davon was face-to-face in Omaha at the InState tour. He had a lot of things to say about Colorado and Deion Sanders. That was a very, very big thing to him in his mind, and he made sure to kind of get that across to me. So I think that it's really interesting looking at the visitor list that we have currently for March 25th. That's the weekend that Dylan Raiola and Carter Nelson and other guys will be there in Lincoln, and you can even go back through on 3 on Husker Online and go through the rest of the month and see what other guys are coming in win, because it's not the only weekend. But there's only 2 guys from in-state, that are so far scheduled to visit Nebraska in March. There is no Hall, there's no Pyfrom, there's no Murphy, there's no Benning. There's some dudes that are missing from that scheduled list of visitors that it's gonna be. You're going to want to watch and see where else they kind of end up during that month of March and when they end up getting back into Nebraska. So definitely something that I was kind of trying to touch on in Tunnel Talk today, because it's certainly something that's caught my eye.
That is very interesting. I don't I don't know how to phrase this question, but I guess there's only one way to say it. Just kind of, maybe why do you think that that's the case? Do you think that they are maybe feel pretty comfortable where they are with these Nebraska kids? But I guess the only question I can kind of think is why not reach more into the in-state kids? It seems like they've been doing everything as far as trying to see every high school and just repairing those relationships. So that news is a little bit surprising.
I'm not really sure as to why there aren't more guys that have scheduled visits. I'm assuming that for part of them, basketball is part of the equation, and that is on their mind, first of all. But then I would say then McMorris is he's on the number 1 team in the state. They're nationally rated.
Yeah.
And he's got a visit set up to go see Nebraska on March 25th. So that doesn't really stand up very well. Maybe there's some things around track. Maybe there's some things around other personal things that are going on, but it's certainly something that I cannot explain. I'm sure it's not the same flat answer across those 4 or 5 guys I previously mentioned, but yeah, it's going to be something to keep an eye on.
That is interesting. Nebraska did do well as far as getting their first commitment in the 2024 class. Roger Grady, what can you kind of tell us about him? And first of all, am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah, Roger Gradney. Yeah, so that's a guy that was off the chart, off the radar. Sunday I was in Lincoln working in person, watching Damian Jackson do long snaps before that as he kind of prepares for any type of tryout action that he could get. And then we were on to covering Lincoln talent. And somewhere on Sunday, an offer was extended from Nebraska to Gradney. And then things just took off. I mean, he has a connection back to Nebraska through Tommy Armstrong. He was familiar with Tommy Armstrong. They're from the similar part of the country down there in Central Texas, around the San Antonio area. So they talked to one another. The offer was definitely something that Tommy was fired up about, as what Roger was. Roger is a 4-star athlete according to On3. He's like the number 21 athlete in the nation. I think I'm saying that right. I think he's a top 200 player in the country. Yet the offers are not there, and there's something clearly that's asking, the people are asking some questions about. So I'm looking forward to catching up with this head coach. I'll be calling him later on this weekend, just try to catch up and see what's kind of going on there. I know that he had been dealing with a hip issue, and he's had surgery, to kind of fix a labrum issue in his hip that's been plaguing him for like 3 years. But if that hip issue is really plaguing him, his film still is spectacular. I mean, he has got some stuff on returns and on defense that really stand out. And Nebraska sees him somewhere in the secondary. He's probably a safety, maybe a guy that can slide down and play some nickel, but he definitely has a role at Nebraska, playing special teams as a returner, because he's very special when it comes to that.
Yeah, another guy with somewhat of a track background as well. He brings the speed to the table. You kind of answered my question there, that they're looking at him as kind of a safety. I was wondering why, he's kind of listed as an athlete, and he claims, kind of claims himself that he could kind of do it all. I was wondering, is there kind of waiting to kind of see how his body turns out, or why do you think the athlete label more so than, a specific, cornerback or whatever?
Yeah, his film at Rice Consolidated just moves him around, and I think that there's a projection that he could do a number of spots in the secondary. There's a projection that he could play wide receiver potentially, at the next level. The wide receiver position, to me, for Nebraska in the 2024 class is such an incredibly competitive couple 3 spots that they have. I see this kind of being more that special teams athlete kind of, put this guy into the class and we'll figure things out. But I wouldn't pencil him right away into the wide receiver. He may end up there. Don't get me wrong. He may end up as being a wide receiver, but I really do truly believe that he's right now penciled in to play probably in the secondary, definitely in special teams. And if things were to work out in a certain way that he needed to get a look at wide receiver, then they would do it. But I do truly feel like right now he's being looked at for defense and special teams only.
Bryan Munson On3 and Husker Online joining us here on the Ticket Water Cooler. And I'm sure everybody's kind of waiting out there saying, Bach, ask the question. Dylan Raiola this week looks like he pulled his visit from Georgia. What does it mean?
Well, so we reconfirmed that with Dominic. So yeah, there's this thing is going to move around a lot, and it's like one of those things I wanted to put in Tunnel Talk this morning, because it was a little crazy and chaotic for me, kind of going back and forth, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. I think that the message that was originally sent about the Georgia visit was, maybe it does or maybe it doesn't happen. It didn't feel like, at least to that person, that they felt necessarily like that was a visit that was gonna happen. However, we got Dominic, his father, to confirm that the visit is still on for Athens. So he will still be visiting Georgia in March. That's the weekend before he goes to Lincoln. So you're kind of looking at that from like a marching order kind of situation. So that's 18th to the 25th. I think the other things that we kind of informed people about today in Tunnel Talk was that I don't think that this is as I think this is much more open-ended with Dylan than what some people are kind of suggesting that it is. I think people had it kind of nailed down to Georgia, USC, Nebraska. I'm not sure that that's the only 3 teams in the bucket for him. I'm not necessarily saying that I know what other teams are there. I think we got a feeling that, that Penn State potentially is still kind of in the picture and going to get a little bit of a look, and there are going to be some other things that are going to kind of come up in the equation. But the consensus number 1 player in the nation right now is maybe a little bit more open-ended than what people are feeling. But good news for Nebraska fans, he will be in Lincoln in a month.
That's interesting. Is there any, I think some people are looking at the Ohio State and the Georgia thing, and the way you kind of said that pretty much dispels this. But it's interesting from the Nebraska vantage point, at least. Is he a guy? I mean, are there certain guys that just want to be a one quarterback class that would be offended if you're going after other guys? And what does that kind of mean for Nebraska if you put all your marbles in one bucket? I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario. I think as a guy with Dylan, like I said, he's the number one player in the country, number one quarterback, number one player in Arizona, and that is across all services. He is consensus, and I think a guy like that really isn't going to be afraid of anything, particularly another guy that's coming in with him in the class, or shouldn't be. I think maybe the room does come up, that as it exists and as it sits currently. And I think that you want to get an understanding about like how the coaching staff really thought things were going to kind of play out. But I know that, it's been said that Georgia's going to grab two guys in the 2024 class. And I think that obviously some people go back and they say, well, Ohio State grabbed that Lincoln Kienholz and they got him in the 2023 class, and that's going to hurt some things. I feel like Dylan is going to make the best possible decision for himself, and he is in such a position to not really have to worry and clutter up his thought process too much, because he has that pedigree and he has the type of talent that shouldn't require him to worry too much about that.
Yeah, I was think back to, I think it was Terry Wilson and Patrick O'Brien, if you remember that. I think wasn't that I think Terry Wilson ultimately didn't like that there was two quarterbacks in the class, or maybe that was just what we took away from it. But I remember him kind of flipping to Oregon there, one way or the other. But anyways, that'll wrap it up for our interview today with Bryan Munson of Husker Online and On The. Bryan, thanks for joining us once again today.
Yep, be good, man. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too. We'll talk to you next Friday. There he goes, Bryan Munson of Husker Online, On 3, always informative, always entertaining, and good to kind of bring us up there on Dylan Raiola and his visits. Still a visit to Georgia, so that's kind of interesting. That kind of came up midweek. All right, we'll take a quick break here on the Ticket Water Cooler. We'll invite Nick Sainert in for the crossover coming up next. Getting ready for Happy Hour. That's coming up next year on 93.7 The Ticket.